We're here with Congressman Chip Roy from Texas, and he has brought Mr. Scott Smith from Loudoun County, Virginia. Congressman Roy, would you mind explaining, he's your guest tonight for the State of the Union, would you mind explaining your choice in having him as your guest?
Yeah, well, for the last 18 months or so, Scott has become a friend of mine, a good friend, and been following the story of the Department of Justice being weaponized against him for daring to go to a school board in Loudoun County to challenge what they were doing to his daughter. The fact that his daughter was abused in a school, and he dared to say, hey, wait a minute, I want to protect my daughter. And what did they do? They made him the enemy. And the Department of Justice said, we need to call him a domestic terrorist. So I asked Merrick Garland about that. And I want to ask why we're having the federal government being weaponized against the American people on all manner of issues. Why do we have Americans on lists by the CDC for not taking a vaccine? Why do we have the ATF keeping lists about what guns we have? Why do we have the DOJ putting a man like Scott Smith on a list and saying you're a domestic terrorist? It's nonsense. We ought to defund the weaponized bureaucracy that is undermining the American people, cutting our ability to have economic growth, and get it back to where it ought to be. And that's what I think the message ought to be to the president today.
And I wonder if you could just comment on that as well. I mean, there is the weaponization committee that's in the Judiciary Committee, and your story was really part of the impetus of having the FBI, the DOJ, go after parents in your case, go after regular American citizens. What do you hope to see come out of that committee, or what do you hope to see the Congress do in order to address that issue?
Well, I hope what comes out of it is that we see that the DOJ was up to no good. Weaponizing themselves against parents and just citizens for various things across our land. That is wrong. President Biden needs to apologize for letting his DOJ weaponize themselves and go after innocent Americans.
So at the root of your story, Mr. Smith, but I want to ask you, Congressman Roy, about the transgender issue and in schools and the women using women's restrooms and things like that. What kind of message are you trying to send, if you are trying to send one, by bringing Mr. Smith to the State of the Union tonight to President Biden?
Yeah, and look, we want to first of all protect our kids and have parents have the right to protect their kids. And just going to a school board and questioning it and then getting tackled because you went to the school board to say, what happened to my daughter? And suddenly he's the bad guy? Now we've seen the superintendent has gotten fired. We've seen the Commonwealth's attorneys pulled off the case. That's a good thing. We saw Glenn Youngkin get elected in Virginia because he campaigned in defense of parents. That's the way it ought to be. This whole issue of having a boy that was dressed up like a girl going into the bathroom in a school, we've turned everything upside down in this country, and the American people are tired of it. We know who are boys and girls. We know, because we're humans. And we ought to actually act that way, follow common sense, and stop pursuing this ridiculous, radical, woke agenda that's undermining our national security, undermining our health and well-being as a society. It's undermining our national security because it's what it's doing to our Defense Department. We can't even recruit right now because we've got all this woke diversity nonsense being taught at our academies and throughout the Department of Defense. We ought to scale that back. We ought to go after the woke, weaponized government and the bureaucracy, get them out of the way of the American people, grow the economy, and actually get us on a path to balanced budget. And I think we can do that if we'll have the fortitude to do it.
So you are a huge advocate of reining in the administrative state.
Yeah.
And we saw basically a weaponized administrative state against President Trump when he was president as well. And they were working in many ways to undermine what he wanted to do. What are your goals for a House of Representatives might not be able to rein it in itself because it's a divided government, but what do you hope to shed light on in terms of having people understand just how the administrative state acts?
Well, understand that a part of our creating a church-style committee, the now weaponization committee on the Judiciary Committee, is to do just that. It's to highlight this, expose it, make sure the American people know exactly what's been going on, how the DOJ has been used, how the intel communities have been used, how the health bureaucracy, the big health government apparatus, NIH, CDC, FDA, has been used to undermine the American people. So if we expose it, the American people can see it, they'll understand why we think it's important to restrain them, pull back their funding, pass regulatory reform to give them less power, make Congress have to approve some of these regulations that are causing people to go to jail. There's a guy who went to jail because he had water on his land under the Waters of the United States rule under the EPA. That is complete crap, and we got to stop it. The American people didn't send us here to just make nice. They sent us here to represent them, to fight for them, to change this town, not to be $32 trillion in debt funding bureaucrats who are at war with the American people. It's time for Republicans to stand up and do what we said we would do.
Mr. Smith, what do you hope to hear from President Biden tonight?
I hope to hear from President Biden tonight, maybe an apology, to all the moms and dads across the land, that he sent his DOJ after. What I'd really like to hear from him is an apology for his two people, I can't say his name, the border guy.
Mayorkas?
Yeah. You need to apologize for him. And he also needs to apologize for Merrick Garland. They both should be ashamed of themselves.